Hey guys, tonight we drift into the morning mists of ancient Tenochtitlan, where the lakes are quiet, the gardens float, and your canoe rocks ever so gently as the sky begins to blush. You're wrapped in a cloak of woven maguey fibers, warm against the pre-dawn chill, and the air smells of damp earth, cut reeds, and the faint sweetness of wild marigold. You blink up at the pale, sleepy stars as they vanish one by one into light. Somewhere to your left, a duck makes a sound that is either contentment or outrage. You're too drowsy to tell which. You roll your shoulders, stretch your arms, and brace yourself for another day in the chinampas, the legendary floating gardens of the Aztecs. You probably wouldn't last long here, what with the mosquitoes, the mud that sucks off your sandals, and the sheer number of things that require balance. But it's beautiful, surprisingly peaceful, and very, very wet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this sleepy little channel travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your fingers trail in the cool water as you sit at the edge of your chinampa, a rectangular island made by generations of hands layering mud, silt, and reeds into what is now a marvel of agriculture. Behind you, squash vines curl like sleepy cats. In front of you, canals stretch into the mist like long silver ribbons. You take a slow breath. Even the birds seem to be whispering. Here's your mainstream fact. Chinampas were an ingenious method of farming used by the Aztecs and earlier Mesoamerican cultures. They weren't truly floating, but anchored platforms built in shallow lake beds, dense, fertile, and remarkably efficient. You run your hand across a row of sprouting amaranth. The plants tremble slightly in the breeze, as if also just waking up. You reach for your paddle. It's worn smooth by use and comfortingly familiar, and push away from the edge to begin your morning loop. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some farmers gave their chinampas names like Mother Earth's Smile or the Singing Mud, believing each one had its own personality and preferences. You've never admitted it aloud, but you talk to yours sometimes too. You murmur, "No rain today, old friend," as you steer past the willow tree whose roots help hold the island together. A heron watches you with deep skepticism. You glide between other chinampas, some already busy with neighbors pulling weeds, hauling compost, or shouting greetings. You answer with a nod. One woman lifts a gourd full of coffee substitute and waves it at you like an offering. You point to your canoe and mime paddling. She nods and shrugs. No time for drinks. Not yet. Historians still argue whether chinampa farming could truly feed a city as massive as Tenochtitlan, or whether it was just one part of a broader agricultural system. What's clear is that it was stunningly productive, 5 to 7 harvests a year without plows or animals. You drift by a boy scooping out algae with a basket. He drops half of it on his tunic, laughs, and waves at you with his free hand. The sun finally breaks over the horizon. The mist glows. The water glitters. And somewhere nearby, someone is already yelling about cucumbers. You smile. It's going to be a long, muddy, beautiful day. You guide your canoe gently into a narrow canal, where the banks on either side are lined with chinampas like green rafts. The air here feels still, heavy with moisture and the quiet determination of growing things. A dragonfly floats past, pauses as if considering your hair for landing, then decides against it. Wise choice. You pull up beside your first task of the day, a chinampa that has been a little too enthusiastic with its weeds. The amaranth and beans are fighting for elbow room with spiky pigweed and clingy purslane. You anchor the canoe with a casual nudge of your paddle and step onto the soft, damp earth. Your feet sink slightly into the spongy soil, which smells of wet clay and ancient compost. You reach down and begin pulling weeds. Not too fast, not too hard. Chinampas are delicate creatures. Pull the wrong root and the whole bed might shift, or grumble at you. You still swear yours did once. Here's your mainstream fact. The soil in Chinampas was dredged from the bottom of the lake itself, full of organic matter, silt, and nutrients. This made them remarkably self-renewing. No fertilizer required, just mud and patience. You toss the weeds into a wicker basket resting nearby, already half full from yesterday. A hummingbird zips past your ear with the urgency of someone late for a flower. You watch it go, hands still buried in a patch of damp roots. The canal beside you laps gently against the bank, and for a moment, you feel more like a gardener of clouds than one of earth. Across the way, a neighbor is singing. You don't know the words. He makes them up daily. But today's tune involves corn, fish, and something about his mother-in-law's elbows. You offer a small chuckle and keep weeding. The light shifts slowly overhead, dappled through the willows that line the edges of the chinampa. Their roots dangle like sleepy fingers into the water, stabilizing the platform and giving herons a place to perch while judging your progress. You wipe your hands on your tunic and step back to assess your work. Neat rows, clear paths, nothing stolen by ducks this time. You nod, satisfied. Here's your quirky tidbit. It's said that the Aztecs considered neat fields and tidy waterbeds a reflection of moral strength. A messy chinampa wasn't just lazy. It was spiritually suspect. You look at your rows with pride. Morally upright rows of beans, thank you very much. You board your canoe again, paddle still wet with morning dew. The water glides beneath you, barely disturbed, like liquid mirror. Your next stop is just a few strokes away. Another chinampa, this one with squash vines reaching hungrily over the sides. You pull alongside it, run your fingers along the thick leaves. One vine has latched onto the handle of your basket, claiming it for the empire of vegetables. Nice try, you mutter, gently detaching it. A frog croaks somewhere close by. You're not sure if it's agreement or protest. Historians still argue whether the exact structure of chinampa foundations included underwater wooden stakes, or if it was purely a woven mass of reeds, earth, and root-binding willow. What they do agree on, it worked. And today, so do you. You kneel at the edge of the squash bed, check for worms, for rot, for tiny trespassing rabbits. You find none. Just healthy vines, sunlit flowers, and the promise of fat gourds. You stretch your arms, let out a quiet breath, and sit still for a long moment. The wind stirs, the water sighs. You close your eyes, just for a little while. You blink your eyes open just as a reed boat bumps gently into your canoe, soft as a greeting or a suggestion. It's your neighbor, the one with the missing front tooth and the laugh that rattles like dry corn husks. He raises a hand in salute, then holds up a fat ear of maize like it's a trophy. Early harvest, he calls. The worms blinked first. You nod solemnly as if this is a great agricultural victory, which, honestly, it might be. Worms are no joke. You paddle alongside him for a stretch, drifting through a corridor of chinampas so narrow that willow branches brush both of your shoulders. The morning light is sharper now, casting golden stripes across the water. Birds flit from post to post. You exchange a few muttered curses about root rot and lazy squash, and then part ways at the next fork, like two boats in a dream politely declining to collide. Your next stop, gathering lakebed mud. Here's your mainstream fact. Chinampa farmers regularly dredged the nutrient-rich mud, called tiatl, from the bottom of the canals, and added it back onto the surface of their gardens to replenish the soil. This natural compost system was one of the key reasons chinampas were so productive for centuries. You find your favorite mud spot, a shallow corner where the water barely ripples and the birds tend to gossip. You kneel in the canoe, reach down with a paddle-shaped scoop, and bring up a heaving pile of black, glistening sludge. It smells alive. Not in a good way, but not entirely bad either. You dump it gently onto the chinampa edge, watching as it slows off the paddle like heavy cake batter. You repeat the process, slowly and rhythmically, until a neat row of new soil lines the garden bed. You pause for water, cool, sweet, carried in a gourd that once belonged to your aunt. It still smells faintly of herbs, though you've washed it a dozen times. Maybe it's haunted. Maybe that's just how gourds are. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve and return to the work, leveling the mud, patting it into the roots, humming quietly to yourself. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some chinampa gardeners believed singing to the plants helped them grow. Others insisted it was just to keep away crows. You're not sure which group you fall into. Maybe both. Your tomatoes seem to like the sound of your voice better than your neighbor does, anyway. As you smooth the last pile, a turtle the size of a serving plate plops itself onto a sun-warmed rock nearby. It watches you with slow, ancient suspicion. You nod respectfully. It continues to exist at its own pace. The sun climbs higher. Sweat gathers at your brow. You dunk your hands in the canal and rinse them clean, watching ripples spread like whispers. Then comes the sound. A soft clatter, almost like bones in a basket. You look up and see a group of gardeners paddling past, their boats piled high with peppers, squash blossoms, and prickly pears. They call out greetings, offer a few jokes about who's got the heaviest tomatoes today, and invite you to join the flotilla heading toward the day's floating market. You glance down at your own modest harvest. It's not much, but it's honest. A bundle of fresh herbs, some early squash, a net of beans, and a cluster of purple corn that's practically showing off. You nod, they cheer. Historians still argue whether chinampa markets were strictly localized or part of a larger Aztec trade web that stretched across the empire. What's certain is this: for most gardeners, paddling to market was half business, half parade. You gather your goods into your canoe, check the knots, brush your hands on your tunic, and push off from the muddy shore. The wind is at your back. The frogs croak a soft rhythm. The canal opens like a road made of sky. It's time to sell some squash. You drift along the water like a reed in a lazy breeze. Your canoe heavy with vegetables and light with purpose. The morning hum has turned into a full-on buzz. Boats jostling gently at intersections, paddles splashing like whispered arguments, laughter rippling across the water from chinampa to chinampa. Up ahead, the wide canal that feeds into the Xochimilco market yawns open like a stage. And oh, what a stage it is. You enter with quiet ceremony, trailing behind a canoe piled high with marigolds, and another overloaded with what appear to be onions pretending to be royalty. A woman in a bright woven shawl rows past with her child curled up among piles of chilies, snoozing like he's earned a cut of the profits. You nod at a man balancing 4 baskets of prickly pear on a canoe that looks one sneeze away from tipping. He grins. Float it till it sinks. You salute him with your paddle. Here's your mainstream fact. The floating markets of the Aztecs, especially at Xochimilco, were dense, mobile marketplaces where produce, flowers, herbs, and gossip all exchanged hands without setting foot on land. Canoes functioned as both stalls and delivery carts, and sometimes even restaurants. You find a spot between 2 boats, one overflowing with gourds, the other with cheerful women selling tamales, an anchor with a casual nudge against a submerged pole. Your canoe sways. You let it. This isn't a place for rigid footing. This is a dance. You lay out your goods on a woven mat, 2 types of squash, a tidy bundle of fresh episode, some beans in a net, and 3 stalks of purple maize that shimmer slightly in the sun like royalty on holiday. A man in a canoe draped with garlic paddles close, sniffs the air and raises an eyebrow. Your beans talk a good game. You smile. They're humble but convincing. He nods and offers a pouch of dried chili in exchange. You make the trade. Here's your quirky tidbit. Bartering in Aztec markets wasn't just about items. It was performance. Traders often exaggerated the virtues of their goods with poetic flair. Saying your squash had sun-kissed skins kissed again by the gods wasn't bragging. It was basic etiquette. You greet a passing woman who's selling flower garlands and floating incense. She flirts, just a little, offering you a marigold crown. You wear it. It smells like yesterday's sun. A child nearby begins to sing a counting song as she passes a bundle of radishes from her father's boat to a vendor with salt. You tap your paddle to the rhythm. This is commerce. This is theater. This is community. You trade more. Herbs for cacao nibs, squash blossoms for a handful of dried berries, and your largest gourd for a painted bowl that's chipped but full of character. The crowd shifts and flows like fish. Silent in some moments, clashing in others. One man tries to pawn off eel jerky with the desperation of someone who's eaten too much of it. You politely decline. You're not that tired. Historians still argue whether these markets were regulated by the state or managed informally by vendors themselves. Some say appointed officials oversaw weights and measures, while others insist it was reputation and word of mouth that ruled here. Either way, no one dares overcharge you, not after last year's squash debacle. You shift in your canoe, stretching your legs and soaking in the chatter. Someone is playing a reed flute nearby, soft and aimless. A group of women debate the best time to plant amaranth. A baby cries. 2 boys argue about who saw the turtle first. You smile. You breathe. You belong. You pack up slowly as the sun climbs higher. Your canoe is lighter now, but somehow you feel heavier. In a good way. rooted, settled, like a chinampa after fresh mud. You push off, paddling home with the rhythm of someone who knows the canal by heart. And the canal, perhaps, knows you back. The paddle dips in and out of the water with quiet rhythm as you steer your canoe away from the market, your goods traded, your basket filled with the strange poetry of bartered items: a ball of beeswax, 3 dried chilies, a garland of marigolds, a small obsidian blade, mostly ornamental hopefully, and a square of amaranth cake that is already trying to melt in the sun. You pass another canoe going the opposite direction, an older man with a boat full of reeds, humming an off-key song about lake spirits. He winks at you. You paddle on. The day has warmed, but not uncomfortably. The sun reflects off the water in scattered patches, bouncing between canoes and lily pads, casting dappled gold on your arms and face. You take a deep breath. It smells like warmth, silt, and roasted corn from someone's cooking fire. You detour, not because you need to, but because you can. And because you're passing by the little canal shrine, the one half swallowed by reeds, with its half-melted stone idol of Tlaloc, the rain god, staring eternally at the water as though waiting for it to misbehave. Here's your mainstream fact. Aztecs left offerings to Tlaloc at countless small shrines throughout their cities and canals, tokens of gratitude or requests for mercy, especially from farmers and chinampa workers who depended on predictable rains and not too frequent floods. You pull up beside the shrine and kneel carefully in your canoe. You reach into your basket and choose the marigold crown, still bright and fragrant. You lay it gently at the base of the statue and murmur something half prayer, half inside joke. Something like, "You were good to me last year, don't get creative now." A frog croaks as if in reply, or warning. You're never sure. You add a pinch of maize flour, scatter a few petals into the water, and sit back to watch them drift. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some canal farmers believed that frogs were messengers of Tlaloc, and that if one croaked just as you made an offering, it meant he was listening. You glance at the frog. It croaks again. You nod. Got it. Message received. You paddle on slowly, letting the canal carry you for a bit. The landscape drifts by in sun-soaked stillness. A willow bent like an old man laughing to himself, a snake slithering through the reeds like it's late to an appointment, a child on the shore trying to fish with a net clearly bigger than he is. You pass a canoe with a scholar in it, robes faded, back straight, scroll balanced delicately across his knees. He glances up, squints at you, and says, "Did you know chinampas are a form of hydro-engineered eco-spatial agriculture?" You blink. "Did you know I have squash in my ears?" He grins. Good answer. Historians still argue whether the canals were originally designed as agricultural aids or transportation routes or both. What you know is that they work, they breathe, they hold up the city like a secret scaffold. And you're one of the 1,000 quiet hands that keep them alive. You paddle into a quieter branch of the canal, where the water narrows and curves like a lazy thought. This is your shortcut home, the back way, the peaceful one. A turtle sunbathes on a plank of driftwood. You stop paddling and float for a moment, letting the silence stretch. You check your basket again. The beeswax smells sweet and sharp. The amaranth cake has given up and become more of a smear, but it'll still be delicious. You lean back, let the canoe drift, and listen to the water. It speaks in ripples, soft and unhurried. And you listen. Because you've got time. You ease the canoe back toward your garden by midday, the sun now high and insistent, turning the water into a mirror you'd rather not stare into too long. A heron flaps lazily overhead. You raise a hand in greeting, though the bird does not return the courtesy. Herons are like that, aloof and excellent at pretending not to see you. As your chinampa comes into view, your home base, your patch of floating green, it's clear that something has changed since morning. The squash vines have crept farther than they should have, curling like gossip into your tomato beds. You sigh with the long-suffering patience of someone who's fought this war before. You dock the canoe, unload your basket, and begin the quiet ritual of setting things in their proper places. Beeswax in the shade. Dried chilies hung from the support beam. The amaranth cake? That goes straight into your mouth. Here's your mainstream fact. Chinampas weren't just farms. They were often lived on, at least part-time, by the people who tended them. Small huts with thatched roofs provided shelter, rest, and a base of operations for full days among the reeds and roots. You sit in the entrance of yours now, half in the sun, half in the shade, brushing crumbs from your shirt and watching a water beetle spin lazy circles near your landing post. A soft breeze nudges your curtain aside like it's asking permission to enter. You let it. Back in the garden, it's time for pruning. You grab your woven knife, a tool sharpened with patience and obsidian, and head for the tomatoes, which are always the first to rebel. You talk to them as you go, gently scolding, praising, snipping. They nod quietly, pretending to understand. You find a fat caterpillar asleep on one leaf and move it to a different plant. It's hard to be mad when someone is that committed to the nap life. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Aztec farmers believed that insects carried omens, particularly butterflies and caterpillars. A sleepy worm on your tomato might mean fertility, or rain, or that someone's been forgetting to rotate their crops. Interpretations varied. You pause to wipe sweat from your brow, using the sleeve of your tunic, which is now decorated with tomato sap in honor. Across the canal, another gardener calls out, asking if you've seen his missing paddle. You point upstream, where a duck appears to be floating past with something suspiciously paddle-like tangled in its wake. You both shrug. Nature reclaims what it wants. The sun inches downward, sliding toward the far mountains with the slow pride of a parade float. Shadows stretch across the water. Birds trade stories on fence posts. You finish pruning, your arms lined with faint scratches and your basket piled with unwanted shoots. You tip them into your compost pile, a glorious heap of rot that somehow smells sweet like earth remembering every meal it ever gave. Historians still argue whether Aztec agricultural success was more the result of human ingenuity or environmental blessing. You'd argue both. You've worked with the soil and seen it reward and betray you in the same breath. Back in your hut, you pour yourself a cup of tamarind water. It's warm, but tart. You sit down, barefoot, legs dangling over the edge of the chinampa like you're fishing for clouds. You don't speak. You don't need to. The squash has been trimmed, the tomatoes are appeased, the canoe is safe, and the wind still remembers your name. Your paddle rests against the side of the hut, drying in the sun like a weary companion. You stretch, stand, and brush your palms on your tunic, which at this point is a catalog of every chore you've done today. Bits of squash sap, tomato leaf stains, maybe a little mud, maybe a little pride. Now comes the late afternoon loop, the one less glamorous, more mosquito-prone, but necessary. Time to check the irrigation channels. You slip back into your canoe, push off gently, and steer into the quieter tributaries, where the water narrows and the world folds inward. These are the backstage halls of the chinampa system, hidden veins that snake behind the market-facing gardens, shaded by tall reeds and echoing with birdsong. The water here runs slower, thicker, and the frogs are louder than the gods. Here's your mainstream fact. Aztec canals were not just transport routes, they were also essential for water management. The controlled flooding of chinampas allowed for consistent moisture without the risks of dry spells or erosion. Clever channels, built with stone and reed, directed and balanced the flow. You poke at a water gate, just a wedge of stone and bundled twigs, and adjust its angle. A gurgle follows, then a shift in the current. You nod. Balanced. Just like life. For now, a turtle watches from a half-submerged log. You nod again. Professional courtesy. You glide onward, the canal whispering beneath you, when a familiar voice calls from behind a screen of reeds. It's the seed trader, still wearing the same straw hat he's had since maize was invented, or so he claims. He waves a small bundle in the air. "Bean sprouts," he announces. You dock alongside him, and the usual ritual begins. He boasts you doubt, he insists you trade. He ends up with a few dried chilies, and you now hold a suspiciously enthusiastic bundle of what he calls fire beans. You sniff them. They smell. Fine. Earthy, slightly judgmental. Here's your quirky tidbit. Aztec farmers often named their seed varieties with poetic flair. Laughing squash, tooth of rain, beans that argue. You wonder if these ones are beans that pretend they'll grow. Still, you thank him. He gives you a wink and vanishes back into the reeds. You drift further down a curve in the canal where the air grows still and the water deepens to an inky green. You know this stretch. It's where the egrets gather at sunset, long-legged and longer-necked, standing like ancient philosophers judging your weed control. You lower your paddle, let the current guide you. You pass beneath a low-hanging willow, its branches brushing your shoulders like sleepy fingers. A ripple glides beside your boat, something unseen but confident in its direction. You lean back, let the quiet settle into your bones. Historians still argue whether the ecological balance of chinampa zones was the result of active management or lucky geography. You suspect it was both, human care paired with nature's tolerance. You pull your paddle gently through the water again, heading back toward your garden. Evening is arriving in slow strides. The air tastes different now. Cooler, earthier, like the end of a chapter. You follow the familiar turn in the canal and spot your chinampa waiting. Patient as always, vines swaying in the wind, your little hut glowing faintly in the low light. You exhale. The water rocks your boat as if to say, "Welcome back." You dock your canoe with a soft thump, stepping carefully back onto your chinampa. The light now slants low and gold, painting your garden in warm brushstrokes. The tomato vines catch it like nets. The squash leaves glow at the edges. Even your hut looks vaguely poetic, though still slightly lopsided. You unload your seed bundle from earlier, the fire beans, that may or may not live up to the name, and place them beside the other little collections you've stashed in a corner of the hut. Dried amaranth heads, a half-gnawed calabash seed, a strangely flat cob of corn that looks like it lost an argument. You stretch your arms, then roll up your sleeves. There's time for one more task before the light disappears entirely. Root checking. You walk the perimeter of the chinampa slowly, barefoot now, toes squishing into warm, forgiving earth. At each corner, a willow anchors your garden to the lakebed. You kneel beside one and gently part the reeds. Here's your mainstream fact. Willows weren't just aesthetic, they were structural. Their roots helped stabilize the chinampa's shape, preventing erosion and keeping the islands intact. Farmers tended them like living fence posts. You examine the exposed roots, thick, snaking, dusted with silt and humming with quiet life. You press down gently, checking for soft spots, waterlogging, signs of rodent sabotage. It all looks good, strong, rooted. You pat the bark like an old friend and move on. Around the second corner, you spot a small pile of feathers. A hawk has clearly paid a visit. You whisper a quick thanks, not for the violence, but for the balance. Nature's patrol, keeping the pests honest. You reach the third corner just in time to catch a neighbor's canoe drifting by. He raises a clay jug in greeting. "Pulque?" he asks. You raise a brow. "Was that made this week or last month? Does it matter?" He tosses it gently into your hands. You catch it with more grace than expected. You take a small sip, fermented agave, cloudy, sour, with a hint of "what have I done?" You hand it back and smile. "Definitely last month," you say. Here's your quirky tidbit. Pulque was a sacred drink in Aztec society, consumed during rituals, celebrations, and sometimes as a reward for labor. Farmers often shared it at dusk, swapping gossip and sore muscle stories. You finish your root check loop, satisfied that the chinampa will hold through the next moon. You sit back by the hut, rubbing your calves, watching a pair of ducks attempt to land on a lily pad with predictable failure. One flaps dramatically. The other simply sinks. You laugh softly. Historians still argue whether chinampa culture was as harmonious as records suggest, or if it masked deeper tensions between social classes and state demands. You figure the answer is yes to both, because even in floating gardens, some people rode harder than others. You lean back on your elbows, staring up at the sky, which is now tinged with lavender and the first hints of indigo. A single star appears, tentative. You whisper to it. Not a wish, just acknowledgement. The air cools against your cheeks. Your arms rest heavy in your lap. The frogs begin their chorus, some low and croaky, some high and earnest. You can't tell if it's music or a meeting. Probably both. You take one more lap around your chinampa with your eyes, checking, admiring, remembering, and then rise slowly, joints stiff but satisfied. Tomorrow, the work begins again. But for now, your roots are deep, your water is still, and the light is soft. And somewhere in the reeds, your fire beans are listening. Twilight drapes itself across the canals like a slow-moving shawl, soft and steady. You're back in your hut now, sitting on a woven mat with your legs stretched out, sipping the last of the tamarind water you'd tucked under a gourd earlier. It's warm, slightly tangy, tastes like sunset. From the open doorway, you can see the water flickering with the last licks of golden light. Every now and then, a boat passes, paddles slicing the calm in rhythmic hushes. The traders are heading home. The children are quieting. Even the ducks seem to be settling their arguments. You rise, stretch, and gather your planting tools. There's just enough light left to tuck a few of the new fire beans into the garden bed. You work slowly, carefully, feeling the dirt crumble beneath your fingers, each pocket of earth like a small promise. Here's your mainstream fact. Chinampa planting was often done by hand, without beasts or metal tools. Farmers relied on sharpened sticks, flat paddles, and their fingers. Gentle, deliberate work that connected them directly to the soil. You hum softly while you plant. Not a song, exactly. More a tune that only your chinampa knows. A melody made of habits and old advice and half-remembered lullabies. The beans slide into the soil like they've been waiting all day. You lean back on your heels and wipe your hands on your thighs. The air now smells of lake water and sweetgrass and something roasting far away, perhaps maize, perhaps fish. You glance toward the main canal where, in the distance, smoke curls into the deepening violet sky. From the reeds comes a sudden rustle, too soft for danger, too large for a breeze. A small otter emerges briefly, stares at you with the wary judgment of someone who's seen 100 gardeners plant with less grace, then vanishes with a splash. You nod. Critic. Here's your quirky tidbit. Aztecs considered otters to be clever, occasionally mischievous creatures. Sometimes messengers, sometimes thieves, always somewhere between sacred and suspicious. You decide this one was probably both. You finish covering the last seed pocket, pressing down the soil gently. A breeze dances through the willow branches, brushing your face like a cool hand. From across the canal, a familiar sound, laughter. You spot 3 canoes drawn side by side. Neighbors, sharing what's left of their pulque, telling stories about the time the chinampas froze, or the day the priest dropped his paddle and had to float home using a basket lid. You know half the stories. The other half? Probably invented, but who cares? You lift a hand and wave. One of them calls out, "Tomorrow we fish. Bring your smallest net and your biggest lies." You grin. Only if I can trade lies for tamales. Done. Historians still argue whether Chinampa society was isolated or interconnected through tight neighborhood bonds. From your side of the canal, the answer is obvious. Everyone knows who lent who a basket, who burned their squash stew, and who keeps forgetting to tie up their canoe during windstorms. You brush the dirt from your palms and head back inside. Your mat waits. So does the ache in your shoulders. You light a small clay lantern, just enough glow to keep the corners from disappearing, and unroll your blanket. It smells like sun, and ash, and home. Outside, the frogs begin again. The stars bloom overhead, one by one, like flowers too proud to open all at once. You lie down, the breeze slipping through your reed walls like lullaby breath. The chinampa sways slightly, and so do you. You wake before dawn, as you often do, not because you must, but because the chinampa stirs without asking. There's a subtle rhythm to the air, a shift in the stillness, the kind of silence that invites you to listen closely. Somewhere nearby, a single bird chirps once, then gives up. Fair. You roll off your mat and onto cool woven reeds. The lantern's wick has burned to a stub, leaving a faint scent of ash and clay. You stretch, arms overhead, bones creaking like old paddle joints. Then you step outside, bare feet pressing into damp soil. The sky is still deep blue, the first pink not yet painted on the edge. The water reflects stars. Your breath puffs in the morning chill, quick, soft clouds. You walk the perimeter again, this time without tools. Just you, the path, and the kind of sleepy inspection that comes from familiarity rather than urgency. Your tomatoes are quiet, your willows are patient. A moth flutters past your cheek like it's lost on its way to bedtime. Here's your mainstream fact. Aztec agriculture was not guided only by seasons or weather, but also by lunar and ritual calendars. Farmers often rose before sunrise to observe celestial signs before beginning major plantings or harvests. You glance up at the fading stars, whisper a half-formed thought toward the one still holding out in the east. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe it's tradition. Maybe you just like having someone to talk to who won't interrupt. Back in your hut, you grab your flat planting stick, known as a hoe. It's polished from years of use, edges rounded by countless jabs into wet soil. Today, you'll put in a few rows of greens, quick growers that fill the gaps between harvests. You step to the southern bed, the one that gets first light, and begin. Press, drop, cover. Press, drop, cover. A rhythm older than the city. From across the canal, a boat passes, two women, laughing, one of them balancing a basket on her head like it's part of her skull. They wave. You wave back with the co. She shouts, "Already planting? Trying to show us up?" You shout back, "I'm bribing the sun. He likes punctuality." They laugh, paddle on. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some chinampa farmers gave their tools names like pets or lucky charms. Yours doesn't have a name. Or rather, it does, but it's too rude to say aloud. Especially when it jabs your foot in storage. Mid-morning now, and the sky turns pale yellow. The birds are fully awake, and so are the mosquitoes. You slap one gently off your arm and mutter something about sharing space respectfully. A canoe floats by slower this time. It's the scholar again with another scroll. "Did you know," he calls, "that some say chinampas were inspired by spider webs?" You raise an eyebrow. "You make that up?" "No, but I want to take credit." Historians still argue whether the chinampa design originated independently or was adapted from older Mesoamerican wetland traditions. Either way, it's genius and resilient. And also, very muddy. You wipe sweat from your brow with the edge of your sleeve. The first rows are done. You sit on the edge of the chinampa, legs dangling over water. A fish blinks at you, then darts off. You wonder idly if the fish ever think about you. Probably not. But you think about them, especially when they steal your seedlings. The light climbs higher. You retreat into the shade of your hut and grab your gourd of water. It's warm now, but still refreshing. You take a long sip, let it sit on your tongue, and breathe out. Your eyes follow the ripples in the canal, the arc of a dragonfly, the lazy curl of a vine. You've planted your rows, you've honored the morning, you've named a few stars. And now the chinampa hums. Not loudly, not clearly, but just enough for you to hear it. By midday, the garden rests. The leaves grow still, their morning ambition giving way to a kind of suspended thoughtfulness. The water stills too, glassy, silent, disrupted only by the occasional swirl of a carp or the tiny plop of a falling leaf. You sit beneath the shade of your hut's overhang, a basket of squash blossoms in your lap, fingers methodically trimming stems and brushing away tiny beetles who seem more curious than malicious. A soft wind teases the tips of the willows, and their shadows ripple across the chinampa like painted dancers. It's not quite time to head to market again, but it's close enough to think about it. You rise, stretch, and begin gathering. The best blossoms, the crispiest greens, the bundle of dried herbs that's been airing in the rafters since yesterday. You wrap each in cloth or tuck it into a reed pouch, careful not to crush anything. Presentation, after all, is everything. Here's your mainstream fact. The Aztec markets weren't just places of exchange. They were performances of order and abundance. Traders arranged their goods in symmetrical piles, often in multiples of 4 or 20, numbers considered sacred. The more organized your display, the more respected your reputation. You recheck your bundles, adjust the squash blossoms into something almost floral, and stack them into the canoe with the practiced precision of someone who knows how fast a turn can undo everything. You push off again, this time slower. The sun is at its highest now, and the air has that thick shimmer of a day too warm to argue with. You paddle gently, a soft shloop-shloop against the hull, guiding your canoe down a different canal this time. Not the shortcut, not the scholar route. Today, you take the scenic path. You drift past a cluster of dragonflies dancing over a pond, their wings flashing blue and bronze. You pass under an arch of vines someone's trained across the canal, just wide enough for boats, just low enough to make it feel enchanted. You duck, laugh, and then the smell hits you. Masa dough, fire-roasted chilies, wood smoke. A tamale boat. There it is, painted red, riding low in the water from its load of steam baskets. A grandmother and her grandson are on board, the former shouting orders and flipping tamales with a barked rhythm. You paddle close. "How much for 2 and an opinion on my tomatoes?" She eyes your basket. "1 tamale and 1 insult, maybe." You grin. Deal. Here's your quirky tidbit. Food boats were common among Aztec canal traders. Floating kitchens that serve tamales, atole, roasted insects, and other treats made midday markets a feast for all senses, and often a source of better gossip than the nobles' palaces. You eat one tamale, save the second, and paddle on. The market buzz begins to drift into earshot, voices bouncing off water. Bargains shouted from canoe to canoe, children laughing, a parrot squawking obscenities from someone's boat roof. Historians still argue whether these daily markets were more social ritual or economic necessity. But you know both are true. People come to trade, but mostly they come to belong. You reach your dock space, the one you always use, the one the eel guy tried to steal once, and tie off. The squash blossoms still look regal. Your greens are cool, your herbs fragrant. You exhale, straighten your back, and sit like a vendor with purpose. Across the water, someone shouts, "Who's got the good onions today?" You call back, "Not me, but I've got better jokes." And so the market begins again. You smile. You're ready. The floating market is in full swing now, and it's glorious chaos. Canoes drift and bob like hungry geese, all jostling politely, but determinedly, for prime positioning. Merchants shout over the water, calling out prices and poetic descriptions. Peppers kissed by the sun, tomatoes sweeter than your mother-in-law's smile, beans that never lie. You laugh at that one. You've met too many beans to believe it. You settle your canoe in the familiar cove near the tamale boat. Your layout is quick but deliberate. Squash blossoms in the center like a floral sunburst, greens folded in neat fans, herbs arranged in small ceramic bowls. You place your tamarind water just out of reach so you can pretend not to notice when someone eyes it enviously. Here's your mainstream fact. Aztec marketplaces were often regulated by appointed officials called Tianquispan Tlamakaski, who monitored trade, resolved disputes, and ensured fair weights. While not always present in smaller canal markets, their presence in larger ones gave credibility to transactions and reinforced community trust. You're grateful there's no one measuring your squash today. Just the woman with the parrot. She floats past, her bird eyeing your herbs with suspicion. She calls out, "Do your greens talk, or just look smug?" You gesture to your herbs. They whisper recipes when the wind's right. She tosses you a piece of dried mango and paddles on. Two canoes sidle up, one with a girl trading handmade fishing nets, the other with a quiet boy offering obsidian scrapers. You swap a bundle of mint for a net and a cluster of tomatoes for one beautiful black blade. You don't need it, but it's perfect. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many traders believed obsidian tools held residual power, sharpness not just of edge, but of spirit. Some would never cut plant roots without offering thanks to the blade first. You run your thumb gently along its edge. It hums, maybe. A boy nearby drops a gourd of beans into the canal. A moment later, a duck surfaces with a victorious expression. The boy shouts. The duck refuses to apologize. The market bursts into laughter. You hand the boy a scoop of your own beans. "No charge," you say. "Tell people they're duck approved." A young woman paddles up next, wearing a garland of marigolds and holding a basket of tamales too fragrant to be legal. She doesn't speak, just trades you one for your last handful of quilites. You eat it on the spot. It's perfect. You sit back in your boat, chewing slowly, surrounded by floating commerce and drifting stories. A man plays a bone flute nearby. A baby sneezes 3 times. Someone tries to sell dried cactus flowers as miracle sleep aids. You raise an eyebrow. "Do they work?" She shrugs. "Well, no one's come back to complain." Fair enough. Historians still argue whether the informal nature of these water-based markets was a sign of decentralization or an adaptive strength of the Aztec economy. You don't argue, you just trade, and float, and smile. The light begins to shift again, softening at the edges. The market begins its slow dissolve, vendors packing up, customers finishing last-minute barters, boats turning toward home. You wave goodbye to the tamale lady. You wave to the parrot. The parrot says something unrepeatable. You laugh. As you push off from the cove, your canoe noticeably lighter. You feel it again. That quiet satisfaction of a day well spent of honest trade and laughter shared with people whose names you may never know, but whose jokes live rent-free in your head. You glide back into the canal. The wind picks up gently. The water welcomes you. You paddle toward the horizon where the chinampas wait. You take the long way home. Not because you're lost. These canals are more familiar than your own face in still water, but because dusk on the water feels like a gift you don't want to unwrap too quickly. The sun has softened into gold, spreading wide across the sky like spilled honey. Everything glows. Even the ducks. Your paddle cuts a gentle rhythm. The market noise fades behind you. All that's left is the quiet swoosh of your canoe gliding forward, the rustle of reeds, and the occasional splash from something aquatic and probably judging you. You pass a group of young traders heading the opposite way, late to market, maybe, or early for gossip. They sing as they go, off-key but enthusiastic, harmonizing with the frogs. One throws you a tamale wrapper like a parting blessing. You salute him with your paddle. A familiar heron watches from a perch on a floating log, neck cocked in that imperious way only herons have. You nod. It does not nod back. Back on your chinampa, the squash blossoms have curled in for the night. The willows sigh in the cooling air. The frogs have convened a full chorus, alto to bass, with occasional percussion by a leaping fish. You unload your canoe without hurry. The obsidian scraper goes into your tools basket. The last tamale, somehow spared, goes onto a plate made from a gourd lid. You light a clay lantern and sit cross-legged beside your hut, watching the first stars appear between the branches. Here's your mainstream fact. Many chinampa dwellers used evening hours to sort tools, dry seed heads, and prepare offerings for the next day's rituals. Night wasn't rest, it was reset. You snap dried stalks into kindling for the cooking fire and stir a pot of leftover beans and squash. The smell is rich and earthy, seasoned with ash and memory. You eat slowly, watching your breath curl in the cool air. Your neighbor drifts past in a shadowy canoe, trailing laughter and smoke. He's playing a flute again, poorly. You raise your bowl in salute. Still flat on the high note. He keeps playing. Here's your quirky tidbit. Chinampa farmers often believed music kept pests away, or, at the very least, made their neighbors more tolerant of them. No one knows if it worked, but it certainly made evenings more interesting. You finish your meal and rinse your bowl in the canal, careful not to drop it. That gourd lid has survived 3 seasons and deserves respect. A breeze lifts the edge of your blanket as you settle in on your sleeping mat. From your angle, you can see the silhouette of your garden, neat rows, tidy vines, the flicker of a lantern at the far end, where a firefly has mistaken itself for a god. You lie back, arms behind your head, legs stretched out, listening to the night bloom around you. Historians still argue whether chinampa life was idyllic or just less exhausting than city labor. You think it's both. There's sweat and splinters and mornings that smell like fish guts, but there's also starlight, and floating, and tomatoes that know your name. A fish jumps. A frog laughs. Somewhere far off, a canoe creaks. You close your eyes, let the breeze do what it does. The chinampa rocks, just slightly. And you drift. You wake gently, without alarm or urgency, the way water wakes when a breeze passes over it. The dawn mist returns like a memory curling over the surface of the canal, softening the edges of everything, your hut, the willows, even your own hands. You sit up slowly, stretching beneath your blanket, feeling the familiar creak of a back that spent its life bent over beans, mud, and the occasional barter argument. The frogs are quiet now. The birds begin their shift. You step outside. The chinampa glistens, still damp from the night. Dew beads on the leaves like 1,000 tiny blessings. Somewhere upstream, someone is already cooking. You smell roasted maize and hear a pot being stirred with a familiar rhythm. You gather your tools one by one, checking them with the same care a warrior checks their armor, not because you expect battle, but because you respect the work. The obsidian scraper, the worn wooden paddle, the reed basket that always leans to the left. You make your way to the southern plot. Your tomatoes have survived the night. Barely. Here's your mainstream fact. Even with their clever irrigation and anchoring techniques, chinampas required constant maintenance. Plant rotation, soil replenishment, pest control, all done by hand, day after day. The gardens flourished only because people did. You kneel at the edge of the tomato bed, fingers parting vines, lifting fruit. You find 2 that are ready, plump, ruddy, almost smug. You pick them and hold them in your palms like tiny red moons. A boat glides past behind you. It's the scholar again, early this time. He calls out, "Do your tomatoes quote poetry yet?" You lift one and say solemnly, "This one only curses in Nahuatl." He laughs. They're learning fast. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some chinampa communities, there was a custom of speaking to harvest, thanking each plant aloud before taking its produce. Whether superstition, ritual, or affection, it made harvesting an oddly conversational act. You whisper your thanks to the tomatoes anyway, just in case. The sun climbs higher. You move to the herb bed, snipping sprigs of epazote and hoja santa, wrapping them in damp cloth and placing them in your basket. Today is not a market day. Today is for tending. You spend the rest of the morning clearing old stems, bundling dry leaves for fire starters, weaving a new carry rope from maguey fibers while your feet dangle into the canal. A bee investigates your shoulder. You let it. The wind rustles the willows. The water murmurs. A turtle climbs up onto your landing plank, looks you dead in the eye, then promptly falls asleep in a sunbeam. You admire the commitment. Historians still argue whether chinampas should be considered gardens, fields, or a category all their own. But the people who live on them don't need to define them. They just call them life. You step lightly around the edges of your garden, checking for soft patches in the soil, reinforcing a willow sapling with a new tie of twisted reed, brushing beetles from the underside of squash leaves with a little flick and a whispered apology. There's no rush. No one's yelling. No carts are crashing. No taxes are being counted. Just the rhythm of sun, mud, and breath. You settle again beneath the hut's awning as afternoon arrives, warm and slow. You drink from your gourd and watch the sun play on the surface of the canal. You don't think about tomorrow's market, or last year's floods, or that time you forgot to tie your boat and had to swim halfway to the temple. You just sit, because sitting is also farming, and silence is also part of the work. The sun begins its long descent, golden and heavy, dipping behind the distant silhouettes of other floating gardens. The water shifts from silver to amber. Shadows stretch long over the chinampas, casting willow branches like scribbled ink across the soil. You sit at the edge of your platform, your legs swinging gently over the canal, a bowl of warm beans in your lap. You eat slowly, savoring each bite like a reward. Not just for a day's work, but for every muddy footstep, every scooped bucket of lakebed sludge, every barter made and beetle shooed. The day hasn't just passed, it's bloomed, grown, ripened, and now it folds inward again. From across the canal, a small chorus of voices sings a quiet evening song, something simple, something old. You don't know the words, but you hum along. Even the birds seem to pause and listen. Here's your mainstream fact. The Aztecs, like many Mesoamerican cultures, often marked the end of the workday with ritual songs or invocations, tying labor to rhythm, music, and memory. Even farmers with sore backs still found time to offer melody to the sky. You wipe the bowl clean with a scrap of tortilla and set it beside you. The water is still now, like glass. You lie back on your mat, watching the last few birds cross the sky. The heron returns to its log. A dragonfly lands on your toe, decides you're uninteresting, and leaves. You're not offended. Here's your quirky tidbit. Chinampa dwellers often slept lightly, waking to check water levels, brush off curious creatures, or listen for signs of trespassers, human or otherwise. But tonight, it's calm. Even the mosquitoes seem to have taken the night off. You exhale deeply, your chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the lake. The sounds blur, frog song, willow sigh, a distant splash. Your chinampa is quiet, but alive. Historians still argue whether the collapse of the chinampa system came from conquest, climate, or slow neglect. But here in this moment, none of that matters, because your roots are deep, your boat is tied, your garden is listening, and your breath slows, and slows, and slows again. You close your eyes. Let the canal still. Let the stars blink gently above you. Let the soil cool beneath your feet and the squash vines curl tighter into their sleep. Let the day exhale, long, soft, and steady, like a reed bending in the night wind. You feel it now, don't you? The rhythm, the calm, pulsing breath of a world balanced between earth and water, sun and mud, silence and song. Because here, history isn't carved into stone or shouted across battlefields. It's planted and weeded and carried in reed baskets. It's whispered in frog croaks and remembered in the way your paddle fits your hand just right. Breathe in, slow and quiet. Breathe out, slower still. Let the fireflies flicker like ancient stars. Let the willows sway with dreams not yet dreamt. Let the chinampa hold you. The night won't rush, the wind won't judge. The garden doesn't ask. you've done enough. You've listened to the soil, you've bartered, planted, sung, and watched a turtle fall asleep in the sun. That is civilization, and that is enough. So rest now. Let the squash guard the corners. Let the tomatoes wait for dawn. Let the water remember your name. The garden hums, the night deepens, and your breath joins the story of things that grow. Sweet dreams.